Hey guys, Tosan here with a Subtlety Rogue burst guide. So first things first, there's not a one-size-fits-all burst sequence that you can do that is perfect against every class in every situation. Your burst sequence, or the order in which you use your abilities, is going to vary greatly based on the situation and what class you're attacking. Some classes you're going to be able to prep with a Nightblade debuff on them before you start stun locking them for a perfect burst. Sometimes you don't have time to get a Nightblade debuff on them before you start your stun lock. Sometimes you're going to just have to immediately swap and stun somebody and then put a Nightblade on them during your stun lock. For example, some classes like rogues or demon hunters or even mages, you have to stun lock perfectly to prevent them from getting away. A rogue, if you don't perfectly stun lock him, can vanish and totally escape your damage. Or a demon hunter can use rain from above and fly into the air, or activate blur, which is an extremely strong defensive cooldown that you pretty much will never kill through. Mages can blink away from you or use temporal shield, druids can use displacer beast to teleport away from you, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of classes that have these really powerful escape tools or defensive cooldowns that you want to prevent them from using, so your stun lock will have to be more airtight against these classes. Whereas some other classes like warriors don't have amazing defensives. You know, a warrior has die by the sword, which is a very long defensive cooldown. DKs also don't have any major escape mechanisms. So certain classes you don't have to worry about doing perfect airtight stun locks, and you can focus more on optimizing your damage against them. So sometimes against rogues or demon hunters, for example, you're not going to be able to do perfect damage during your stun lock because you have to prioritize getting a perfect stun lock so they can't escape. And of course, things like Orc and Relentless are going to force you to change your burst sequence as well. So the main point I wanted to get across before showing you examples of good burst rotations is mainly that you're going to have to constantly change how you're doing your burst rotation and adapt to the situation and the target. Now, right before we get into these clips of bursting people down, I also wanted to recommend using Symbols of Death with your Shadow Dance right when you're opening on somebody really hard. You're doing it for the 15% increased damage, not for the energy recovery. I very rarely find myself starved for energy unless I've just been slashing at somebody for a very long period of time in between my bursts. For the most part, maintaining your energy is very easy, and what's more important is getting maximum damage during your burst rotations. So although you should have a separate keybind for it, I also macro Symbols of Death with my Shadow Dance. So far, I haven't found a situation where I regret macroing them together. Alright, now let's check out some burst examples. So first, here's an example against a cheeky rogue trying to cap my flag. So I cheap shot him into a 3-point Nightblade. With Dance active, I do a Gormal's Bite into another Shadow Strike, and then a Kidney Shot, Marked for Death, Eviscerate. He trinkets. I'm going to do a triple DR cheap shot, another Shadow Strike, and he's going to vanish, but luckily I get to Shadow Strike him one more time in the booty before that vanish goes off. Now, one thing you may have noticed is there was a brief gap, a very short gap between the first cheap shot and the Kidney Shot. That is a little bit risky, and sometimes that happens. The gap was so incredibly small, though, that unless he has some sort of godly 1 MS latency, he's probably not going to get an ability like Vanish off in between that little gap. And if he didn't trinket there, he definitely would have died inside that stun lock. So again, cheap shot, Nightblade, Dance, Gormal's Bite, Shadow Strike, Kidney Shot, Marked for Death, Eviscerate, cheap shot on his trinket. If he didn't trinket there, I would have just continued Shadow Striking him inside that Kidney Shot into an Eviscerate instead, and then cheap shotted him again at the end of the Kidney Shot into probably one more Shadow Strike, and he'd be definitely dead by then. Now here's the situation in Arena. I already have combo points generated. Arena is a little bit unique. I don't have to immediately stun the target, so he's a little laggy because I'm playing on EU in this clip. So with my combo points, I'm going to Shadow Step Nightblade, and then I'm going to Dance Cheap Shot. Not having to use the extra global on a Nightblade is really nice for getting perfect stun locks and bursts off. However, as I mentioned before, sometimes it's risky to prep a target with a Nightblade before you stun lock them. Because, as you can see here, this made it obvious that I was planning on attacking him, so he got a feint off, which is going to reduce the damage he takes by 30% until it runs out. Now, this isn't the end of the world that he got the feint, because I can stun lock him longer than his feint lasts, so it will fall off and we can time a lot of our burst at the end of the feint, but still, a lot of the time if you telegraph your intentions by putting a Nightblade on a target and, clearly attacking him, they can preemptively use a defensive cooldown. If he was a Demon Hunter, for example, he could have used Blur or Rain from Above to stop our burst. But luckily, I'm not trying to burst him all by myself, so it's not that big of a deal because my mage can offer a lot of extra damage to make up for that feint. So after the Nightblade, I'm going to dance Cheap Shot into a Shadow Strike, into an Eviscerate, into another Shadow Strike, into a DR Cheap Shot, into a Gormall's Bite, and then into a triple DR Kidney Shot. Now this was a little weird. I used Gormall's Bite even though I had 5 combo points already. This means I wasted combo points because my Gormall's Bite would have generated 3 combo points. So why did I do this suboptimal rotation at the end there? The reason why is because you can't always predict exactly how much damage the target is going to take when you're stun locking him. Is his healer getting off any heals, or is he totally CC'd? How many crits are we getting? How much damage is my teammate contributing? There's so many variables and it's hard to predict. So even though you don't typically want to Gormall's Bite when you already have 5 combo points, the reason I did this is because Gormall's Bite hits really hard. So basically what happened is I expected that we would have nuked him a lot faster. I didn't even notice he got a feint off, so I thought, yeah, this guy's totally dead for sure. Or if my trinket tracker isn't bugged out in this case, he could totally trinket this stun lock and survive. So you can't always predict exactly how one of your burst sequences is gonna go. Sometimes you expect to do more damage, sometimes you expect to do less damage. So this is what I was explaining at the beginning of the video. You're not always going to get a perfect flawless sequence in every situation. Sometimes you have to adapt and change it up to secure a kill. For example, here I didn't have Symbols of Death ready for this burst at first, only at the very end did I have it. On top of that, I only had 1 charge of Shadow Dance. Had I had a second charge of Shadow Dance, instead in that scenario, instead of using a Gormall's Bite when I already had 5 combo points, what I would have done differently at this moment is done a 5 combo point Eviscerate, and then activated my second Shadow Dance into another triple DR Cheap Shot into a Gormall's Bite to finish him off, and he most certainly would have died there. But because I started my assault on this rogue with only 1 charge of Shadow Dance and my Symbols of Death was not ready, I had to adapt to the situation and change my rotation on the fly. And of course, in hindsight, I also had my Vanish, but it was just one of those situations where I was caught a little off guard because I expected things to go differently, and I didn't really have time to process exactly what I needed to do. So in hindsight, I could have just done a better rotation and then just vanished for a triple DR Cheap Shot and probably killed him anyway. So this is the most important aspect of Rogue Burst that I want to get across to you guys, is that the circumstances change drastically depending on what class you're stun locking, what cooldowns and abilities you have available at the time. Sometimes in a hectic 3v3 match, for instance, you don't have time to do a perfect burst or wait for all your cooldowns to come back up. Now in that scenario, I probably could have waited a few more seconds for my Symbols of Death to come back up, but in a hectic environment like 3v3 Arena, sometimes you can't perfectly plan a flawless assault, so you have to just make do with what you have, and clearly it was enough to get a kill regardless. Sometimes you can afford to wait for a really perfect stun lock on a class like a Rogue, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes your team is about to die because you're out of cooldowns and you need to get a kill right now. Another thing that is absolutely crucial for mastering Rogue Burst is understanding how every class works. Every class has different tools to escape or survive, and you have to understand what they have available so that you know how to counter it or prevent them from using it at all. For example, Demon Hunters, like I mentioned before, are very much like rogues. If you don't perfectly stun lock them, they have many ways to stop you from killing them. They can blur or rain from above, or they can imprison you. So it's very important to do a really optimal perfect CC chain and burst. So here I'm going to Cold Blood Cheap Shot, Nightblade, Dance, Gormall's Bite, Shadow Strike into a half Kidney Shot. Now here it's going to get weird because I don't know how much damage I'm going to do in this Kidney Shot. Will I kill him before the Kidney Shot's over? It's not looking like it. So instead I'm going to Vanish and Cheap Shot again. Even though I already had 5 combo points and could have eviscerated, if I didn't Vanish and Cheap Shot him right then and there, he might have used Imprison or Rain from Above or Blur or something like that, and it might have been a lot harder to finish him off. Here's an example of bursting a Warlock. I'm going to wait for this annoying Ring of Peace to go away, and then I'm going to go ham on this Warlock, and I'm going to start with the Cheap Shot on the Mistweaver Monk so my teammate can probably sheep him off of that. Now, Warlocks aren't like Rogues or Demon Hunters. For example, they can't do something like Feint or Blur or Rain from Above to escape. So I mentioned before how you can maybe prep the target with a Nightblade beforehand, and this will help you do an even more optimal burst rotation. Warlocks are one of those classes that are pretty easy to set up on. You have plenty of time because they're not highly mobile and they don't have any crazy ways to escape your damage, so you can usually prep them with a Nightblade very easily. This will free up an extra global cooldown as well as some extra combo points to do a more perfect burst. Now, of course, if a Warlock does see you setting up on him and he has good awareness, of course he could take his portal or his gateway to try to buy himself some time. But in this case, he's not near his gateway and his portal won't take him very far, so he can't really escape no matter what. So I cheap shot the healer for my mage to sheep. I Shadow Strike, get a 5 combo point Nightblade. I also have Shadow Blades activated, so I get extra combo points. So with Dance Up, cheap shot into a Shadow Strike, into an Eviscerate, then a Gormal's Bite, followed by a 4-point DR Kidney Shot. He's going to Trinket that. I Shadow Strike him again, a triple DR cheap shot, a Smoke Bomb, and then an Eviscerate. Now, I didn't even need to Smoke Bomb there because my mage got him in another Polymorph, and he's not playing Trinket, so he couldn't Trinket Cocoon or anything like that. But I was playing without voice comms in this clip, so I wasn't sure if my mage was even going to get another Polymorph on him, so I did it anyway. Now, when it comes to Orc Relentless targets, things are just tricky, and there's honestly no perfect way to do it. Orc Relentless is just way too strong against you as a Subtlety Rogue, so prepare to be frustrated. There's no secret answer to dealing with Orc Relentless. The best thing I can recommend against Orc Relentless is to start with a full Kidney Shot and try to prep the target with a Nightblade if you can. In this case, we're not prepping the Shaman with a Nightblade because we're doing a hard swap, and we can't afford to have him swap Earth Shield to himself. So my Boomkin partner's calling for a hard swap, so what I'm going to do is Shadow Step Kidney Shot him. Now, even though he's Orc Relentless and it's not going to last that long, it's still better than doing cheap shots. The reason Orc Relentless is so annoying is because if you're doing cheap shots instead of starting with a Kidney Shot, you're not going to have very many global cooldowns available for actual damage. The stuns are simply too short. It's very hard to squeeze in damage while also keeping the target stun locked and preventing him from using things like Earthen Shield Totem, Spirit Link Totem, or refreshing Earth Shield on himself for that damage reduction. So honestly, if you're trying to swap to a target that's Orc Relentless, I would highly recommend prepping him with a Nightblade if possible, but even if you can't risk prepping a target with Nightblade because of obvious reasons, like he'll, use a defensive beforehand, the only thing I can really recommend to help against these targets is just starting with a full Kidney Shot every time instead of relying on cheap shots, especially if he's at full health. The Orc Relentless combo really throws a monkey wrench in your burst. So as you can see here, I Kidney Shot him and then I Dance, Shadow Strike, 2-point Nightblade, Marked for Death Eviscerate. Now the Marked for Death Eviscerate was actually very risky here because there was a small gap between the Kidney Shot and the re-cheap shot. Luckily he didn't get any vital cooldown to save his life in between that stun lock. The problem with leaving a gap like that against a class like Resto Shaman is he could have activated Astral Shift and mitigated a lot of that damage and probably survived. I think the burst was just so crazy it caught him off guard. But you have to be really careful about giving a class like that a gap between your stuns, and Orc Relentless makes it way harder for you to actually deal burst damage while keeping him stun locked perfectly. So besides starting with a Kidney Shot instead of a cheap shot, that's all I can really recommend. It's going to be frustrating dealing with Orc Relentless characters in general. Now the final thing I'd like to say is that starting your burst sequence with a Kidney Shot is almost always a good idea. Unless Kidney Shot's on cooldown or you needed it to peel a different character or perhaps CC chain the healer with a Kidney Shot and then cheap shot your kill target. Assuming you have it available freely for your kill target, I highly recommend using Kidney Shot to start your CC chain to burst your kill target. And the reason why is because it's a 6-second stun and it only costs you 1 global cooldown, whereas 2 cheap shots is a 6-second stun, but that's 2 global cooldowns you have to use on it. On top of that, you can do a 6-second Kidney Shot into a 2-second cheap shot instead of 4 seconds, 2 seconds. So this is going to make your burst a lot more clean and smooth and easier to do without having gaps in your stun, and it will give you an overall longer stun lock on the kill target. So guys, that pretty much wraps up this guide on Rogue Burst. The closing message and moral of the story, though, is that class knowledge and being able to adapt to various situations is key. There's no one-size-fits-all burst. Like I said at the beginning of this video, you can't just always do the exact same sequence in every situation against every target. You have to know and understand how all the classes work so you know how to counter them and adjust your burst accordingly. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you feel like it, and of course share it with anybody else that you think might find it useful. Thanks for watching as always, and peace out.